So then I would say, well, what do you think people are doing that is causing all these problems? And the general answer is they're not following process. Okay, now we need to have process, but sometimes processes need to be changed. But the lesson learned out there is that don't just simply do something different than the process. Change the process. Follow a process to do that. So the problem is that people are either doing things that they're not supposed to do or not doing things that they're supposed to do. But it all boils down to process.
Hi, welcome to Project Management Matters. This is a podcast about all things project management, from projects, programs, portfolios, PMOs, and everything in between. We discuss everything that has to do with the profession and highlight leaders in the profession and in the field. Today we have Frank Saladis. Frank is a long-term PMI leader and volunteer. He is a PMI Fellow, and he is one of the longest-serving chapter presidents in the PMI ecosystem. So Frank, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. It's great to see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Let's get started by talking about your passion for the profession. You're one of those leaders that I've known for many, many years, and you're extremely passionate about the profession, how it evolves, how it's shaped. You've been a professional, consultant, educator, and you've served in a variety of PMI roles. When did you realize that project management is something that you want to advocate for?
I think that my project experience started when I was a kid, basically. My family spent a lot of time, building things. Like we did construction work on houses and things like that. We worked on cars and put engines together and things like that. So, we just had this kind of upbringing of doing things, making things, But the professional project management part came, I'm working at AT&T at the time, and I was assigned, we did small projects, basically. I think that a lot of the work that we did was projects, but in 1989, I was assigned to a newly formed organization called the Project Management Organization, PMO, back then, 1989. And my boss, his name was Dan Ono, was a extreme professional when it came to project management. So when we were brought into to this group, there were about maybe 20 of us. A couple of things that happened here was that he said, you have to get your PMP, and I'm going to give you 24 months to get that. And if you don't have it in that 24 months, then you're not going to have a job. So I said, well, okay, let's do that. And the other thing was that he was very professional. I mean, everything had to be done a certain way. He was an advocate of the PMBOK guide, which we didn't really have a PMBOK guide until 1996. So we had the document that was before that PMI referred to as the body of knowledge of project management. And we went through all of the training. And another thing that we had to do, this was a requirement, was we had to join PMI. So I joined the New York City chapter in 1990. And then in 1990, I experienced my first PMI seminar symposium, which was in Calgary, Canada. And I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. I didn't know we had this kind of thing going on in project management. And it was not only an educational experience, but it was also a lot of fun because we went to, part of the program was to go to the Calgary Stampede, which was an amazing event. And I also got my first introduction to PMI Fellows. They were awarding some folks the PMI Fellow Award. And, I was looking at these people up there and I was wondering, how did you get to be a fellow? And they kind of inspired me because they were all contributing so much to PMI and the profession of project management. And I said to myself that, when I grow up, I want to be a PMI Fellow. And that was my inspiration there. And then the New York City chapter wasn't really doing anything. So I joined in 1990, but there was very little activity going on. There was no meetings. It was kind of dormant. And somebody in my group that had also joined PMI NYC said, "Why don't you become president?" So I became president in 1991, and I started the journey of getting PMI on the map. And I was actually president over a period from 1991 to 2001. So I was president for 10 years as we built the chapter. And during that time, when I first started out, I was doing all of the work. I was scheduling meetings, I was doing the newsletter, I was giving presentations, I was mailing information and faxing back at the time. I was doing all these different things. And I started to bring in board members. And New York City is kind of a transient place, so we had a board member come in for a while, and he'd come out, in and out. So it took several years to actually get a good, solid board. And then we started to build the membership. So when I took on the presidency in 1991, there were 45 people that were registered as members of the chapter. In 2001, we were at 2,500. So we started developing strategic plans, bylaws, election processes. We did a bunch of different things. We kind of went from the ground up. And then I started to teach, or I actually present presentations and workshops at the PMI Chapter Leadership Institute meetings. And I really enjoyed doing that. I started to share a lot of information, and I just kind of built up a lot of information that I was able to pass on to PMI membership. And PMI kept growing and growing. And then I was also a presenter at the PMI seminars, symposiums, world congresses, and summits, basically from 1993 until 2015. I was consistently giving presentations, and I enjoyed it. And then I did some training, and I am still doing training and consulting today. And I've written quite a few articles on leadership, and was the author and co-author of 12 books. So that's kind of my history of being involved in project management.
This is fantastic. When you look at all these decades, you just did a great job at summarizing it. I want to kind of delve into a few things that, perhaps maybe the audience didn't catch when we were talking about 1990. I mean, that was quite a while ago. Tell us a little bit about the PMI landscape then, in terms of the type of individuals who were participating, the industries represented. Did you immediately find an easy way of connecting people, bringing them into the folds of the profession?
Well, when I joined in 1990, PMI, the chapter, the total membership of PMI worldwide was about 10,000 members. And of those members, most of them were in aerospace, oil and gas, and construction. And I think, in kind of thinking back to all the people that I spoke to back then, PMI didn't think they were going to grow much more than that. It seemed to be like a small group of people, mostly in the construction industry and aerospace and so on. And that's the way it was. And I was in AT&T, so I was in IT and telecom. And there really wasn't that big a presence of IT at that time. And also project management was absolutely 100% predictive, what we call traditional project management. Then things started to change a little bit, 1991, 92. Agile became something that people were looking at really closely. They had the Agile Manifesto come out in 92, I think it was. Critical chain was now a popular way of managing projects. It was created by Ely Goldraith, who wrote this book, Theory of Constraint. And that was sort of like a major change to project management. It was more resource-based than it was critical path-based. And then things started to keep evolving, but The membership really didn't grow that much. It's just that these things were kind of changing the landscape a little bit. But in 1996, which was really kind of an interesting situation, was PMI's membership, I think, quadrupled. It went from 10,000 to, I don't know how many, 40,000 people.
About 36,000, I
What's
think.
that?
I think about
Yeah.
36,000. That's when I roughly joined the
Yeah, so
PMI.
it just jumped big time. And a lot of people wondering, well, what happened back in 1996 that caused this influx? And the answer to that was that IT was now becoming a very, very critical part of any organization. And 4 years from 96 was the year 2000, Y2K. And there was a tremendous interest in project management since a lot of infrastructure and systems had to change to meet the conversion in Y2K. And I just remember one thing about that. So people started to plan and plan and plan about Y2K. And I remember the press and people always talking about this gloom and doom, that so many terrible things were going to happen in 2000, that planes were going to fall out of the sky and elevators were going to drop to the bottoms of buildings and ships would sink, and it was just going to be such a disaster. And then when Y2K came, like nothing happened. And it was almost people were like disappointed. Oh, well, nothing happened. How come? And the answer was 4 years of planning, to make sure that nothing happened. And people were like, well, wow, how did that all happen? It was risk management, it was project management, and from there, I would say that PMI's landscape changed quite a bit, and it became more dominated by the IT and software development world than it did by construction and so on. But that was kind of an interesting thing
Yeah,
to see that happen in '96.
absolutely. And, I can certainly remember those days and remember some of the discussions that we had subsequent to Y2K. One of the interesting things about you is that, as soon as you got introduced to project management, you immediately jumped into being involved in PMI. And that is a similar story to many volunteer leaders, but not necessarily the norm for all professionals. What was it about that aspect of stewardship that kind of enticed you to be involved? What was the driver behind that passion, especially around the local community and building up the PMI New York City chapter?
Well, I think that the really driving factor was when I became part of the AT&T project management organization and got introduced to what we're going to call formal project management, and the fact that we were developing as a very professional organization. We had methodologies. We were learning the project management software at that time. And we were becoming a very significant part of a lot of AT&T types of work. We had project managers in a lot of different places. And we just I just felt that this was like the home. This is where to be. We're professional. We have a skill that's kind of unique. We have a certification. We had to get the PMP certification. And back then, there weren't that many PMPs out there. My PMP number is 535. Okay, so,
Wow.
we have like a million PMPs out there as far as I know today, but mine was 535. And I took it seriously. I said, I have this credential. I'm working on projects. I'm leading teams. And that was another thing, is to be the leader of a team and learn a lot of new things, new technology, things like that. So it was pretty inspirational. And of course, I had been going to PMI's Leadership Institute meetings, and I was listening to people in these workshops, and they were providing their experience and so on. And I said, I think I could be a part of that. So I started writing, actually applying for the PMI symposiums and World Congresses. My first one was in 1993. And I based my first paper on a very large project that I did at AT&T. And then I really got a taste for doing that. I was really feeling pretty good about it. I'm presenting, I'm meeting all these people. It was it was not just educational. It was enjoyable. It was a lot of fun. So I said, I'm going to keep doing this. And Then I met several PMI Fellows, and we started talking about all of their contributions and so on. And I said, like I said, I'm going to work towards that. I'm going to contribute and be part of this organization. So I've done that pretty consistently for the last 35 years, finding ways
Yeah.
to just contribute.
I remember we met in the late 90s probably, and one of the things that was kind of an immediately obvious trait that you have is this sense of optimism and ability to just kind of jump in there and solve problems. I remember a couple of interactions where, we were talking about a problem and you were just like, well, let's just go ahead and get it done. And that reminds me of something that you were the originator of, which is the International Project Management Day. I think that many probably are aware of the International Project Management Day and are aware of your contribution to being that originator. But I'm sure we'd love to hear a little bit about the story and the journey of that, because it's become such a global phenomena, and it's almost kind of like people take it for granted that it's here. And
Yeah.
I think you had a great part in driving that and originating the idea.
Well, I attended the Leadership Institute Master's class in 2004. That was an 18-month program that you needed to apply for and be accepted in. But myself and 24 other people became part of this class of 2004. And that was a kind of a very hands-on kind of leadership training program. We were exploring leadership from many different aspects and from very different cultures and things like that. It was really a great educational experience. But the idea of International Project Management Day came at the commencement exercise when our professor, Jerry Brightman, closed out the commencement by saying, "Go out and change the world." And, that's like, okay, how do you do that? How do you change the world? And I gave that a lot of thought. And I said, we at that time, and it's still true today, that a lot of people really didn't know what project managers did, what the job of the project manager is. And most of the things that project managers do are kind of taken for granted. And I said, we need to get people to really recognize the fact that this job is very unique. It's so different and also so challenging that people should really be aware of what it is. So after giving some thought, I said, you know what? We need a day. We need a day that's designated for project managers. And my reasoning behind that was we have Mother's Day and Father's Day, and we have all these different holidays. We have Executive Assistant Day, and we have Grandparents' Day. And in New York, in the U.S., we have National Beer Day and Ice Cream Day and all these. So I said, we need a day for project managers. And I came up with International Project Management Day. And I started looking at days on the calendar. And every day on the calendars, there are multiple things going on. So I picked the day that had the least number of holidays worldwide, which was the first Thursday of November. So in 2005, the International Institute for Learning, I was working with them at the time, said this is really a pretty good idea. And what we did was we had the first worldwide webinar of international project management in 2005. And then it took off, and it was done every single year. And even this past November, it was still going on. And, 20, 30,000 people were attending just that one event. And then there were events all over the world at companies and at PMI chapters. And of course, PMI puts out a kind of a big thing on LinkedIn where we have people taking their pictures, and it's International Project Management. It got to be really big. But I always tell people, about the reason that we have International Project Management Day is it's not a celebration of projects. It's a recognition of project managers. It's acknowledgement. And in one of the times when I was giving a presentation on International Project Management Day, I suggested to project managers that when somebody asks you what you do for a living, don't answer, I'm a project manager, because they're not going to really understand that. So my suggestion was really to tell them that you're working on a project or a program that is going to change the lives of thousands of people. Give them something like, wow, let's talk about that. And I also tell people that it really doesn't matter what we have out there. Buildings, trains, planes, buses, ships, laptops, smartphones, you name it. Every single thing that people use every day was the result of a project. And we don't have that appreciation. So International Project Management Day is really meant for people to say, wow, I didn't realize the things that project managers and their teams do. And that's really how it all came about.
That's fantastic. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about leadership, because I know this is a subject that you are particularly interested in, and you've written extensively about positive leadership in project management. What does positive leadership look like when a project is under pressure and things are going wrong?
Well, I always say, and maybe some people will disagree, is that in especially in times of real trouble, is when you have to display your personal confidence that we're going to get through this. Okay, it's not a good idea for the leader to look like they're panicking, because I think the team will panic more. So I learned that from a lot of executives. I've been in situations where we had a organizational situation, pretty serious thing, and these people that were running the organization, they did not panic. They didn't even look like they were going to panic. They would sit back and they say, okay. So tell me where we're at right now. What's the up to the minute information that we have, okay? And what are the recommendations, okay? And they provide like firm direction and guidance, and give this feeling that we're going to get through this, but we're not going to do it just me. It's going to be us. Okay, so I might be able to send orders out. I might be able to get some things done through influence, but I'm going to need you to get things done. So tell me what you need. So I don't see the positive leadership part is that don't panic, but also realize you don't have all the answers. You're not going to be able to solve everything that's out there. That you need to rely on the team, the people that are closest to the issues. And this nature of not panicking, but being calm but concerned. Okay, it's not like, oh, this is nothing big. They showed their concern, but they draw you in and they get you involved, and then say, okay, what are your recommendations? What do you need from me? I can make it happen. But they just it's a sense of real confidence that we're going to get things done. And I think that the confidence is the fact that the leader says, we have a really good team, and it's my team that's going to make this happen. And I think that that's a really key factor.
I love that. I think that it's very appropriate, especially about not having all the answers. I'd learned a few years ago that when my teams came to me, whether they reported to me directly or part of a program or project, if they come asking for solutions, oftentimes they actually have the solutions, and maybe I don't have the answers. So asking them to come up with the solutions, does that in terms of engaging them, showing that steady hand, but at the same time, working with them to understand that the leader doesn't necessarily always have all the right answers, and it's really the group that has that. So that's great. When you look at your years or decades really of teaching and facilitating, and you mentioned you love it, and I can attest to being there in the audience, hearing you and watching you, and you're quite good at it. If you look at some of the practices or lessons that you've taught others, what is some of the behavior or mindset that project managers are resistant to in the beginning, that maybe later on they come back to you and they say, you know what, that really had an impact, or that worked really well.
Well, I think that just thinking about the people that go on and study and get the PMP exam, and they use the PMBOK guide, the guide to the project management body of knowledge. So many of them got very regimented into that you have to do it this way. This is the step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And I would always tell them that's that information that you are getting are suggestions based on practices across multiple industries. And what you have to do is that you have to use really good judgment and use the tools and techniques that are most suitable for your organization. You shouldn't have like a straightforward, narrow-minded approach. That you need to be flexible, you need to be adaptable, you need to accept change, okay? But I use a quote from Dr. Harold Kersner in his textbook. He said that 90% of project problems are caused by people, not by machines, tools, or equipment. And just about everybody agrees with that. I mean, if you think about the last project that you worked on and there was a problem, what was it caused by? Was it caused by people or machines or tools or equipment? And the answer is like almost all the time it's people. So then I would say, well, what do you think people are doing that is causing all these problems? And the general answer is they're not following process. Okay, now we need to have process, but sometimes processes need to be changed. But the lesson learned out there is that don't just simply do something different than the process. Change the process. Follow a process to do that. So the problem is that people are either doing things that they're not supposed to do or not doing things that they're supposed to do. But it all boils down to process. So my suggestion to everyone is always look at your processes and look for improvement. You can always make improvement, incremental improvement. There's nothing that cannot be improved, even just a little bit. So the idea here is that if you see something that needs to change, then go ahead and start the process to make it change. But don't do things in such an arbitrary way that you're going to disrupt things and cause problems. So there are books out there that says all rules are meant to be broken and all that. No, they're not meant to be broken. They are meant to be changed and updated. Because if people simply broke the rules, other people would get hurt. And I'm against that. So you don't like something, take the steps to change it. But do it in such a way that it makes sense for everybody. And I'll just say one more thing about that one of my favorite quotes, there are two actually. One is that project management is nothing more than organized common sense. And the other one is that experience comes from good judgment and, good judgment comes from experience and experience comes from bad judgment. So all of us have had some bad judgment in our lives and we should be learning from that. And I say that in just about any class or lecture that I've been doing, are those two quotes, and they make perfect sense, and people should follow that.
Yeah, it's a lot of common sense. And I have to say, when you were talking about, engaging people on process in particular, one thing came to mind. Perhaps I think this goes back to the first ever project management course that I attended. My first thought out of that week-long course was, who would be an individual who would benefit greatly from this course? My boss. And then, many years later, when I started doing training myself and offering that, training courses, I would often hear that from my participants. I'm wondering, how would you respond to a question like that, or to a comment from an individual who attends your workshops who says, I bet that my boss or my sponsor would benefit greatly from attending your course?
It's funny you say that, because in almost every course, somebody says, my boss should be attending this, and it is true. So I advocate that people who are managing project managers, okay, the bosses, need to understand what project managers do. I think that a very large percentage of them really don't know exactly what the project managers do. They might use some phrases and words that make it sound like they know what they're talking about, but a lot of them don't. And I understand that the management, especially when you get up into the C levels and so on, they don't have time to take a week-long project management course. We need to condense it down into an executive summary type of course, just a couple of hours to say, this is what project managers do. These are the jobs they have. These are the roles that they have to fill. These are the challenges that they have, that they really need a visible presence from their sponsors and their bosses, that as they move forward with the project, that they're going to get the support that they need. Okay? They don't need to be watched every day, every hour of every day, but the boss and the project manager should always set expectations and do that very intentionally so that they know where each other is coming from. So yes, I encourage all bosses of project managers to take some type of, high level summary. This is what project management is. This is what project managers do, and it will set the stage for a much more productive relationship, and probably do a lot to improve the way the organization operates anyway. So I think I'm an advocate for that.
Yeah, I agree. I've had a session one time with a corporation where they brought in the key leaders of different functions, and while they appreciated it, even though they weren't project managers, they came out saying, you know what, now I understand what these guys are trying to do. So it was a little bit of a bridge builder between the functions in the organization and the project management professionals. I want to talk about your leadership, volunteer leadership roles, and what that might have taught you about leadership in a corporate setting. I remember I've engaged many individuals who have been long-term volunteers, and they talk about the wealth of knowledge that they got out of their volunteer experience. And you're certainly one of those individuals who've participated on the local, national, and international level. What has volunteer leadership taught you in terms of applying that on a corporate or organizational level?
Well, okay. I think that when we talk about volunteers, just for a minute, see, I always emphasize to people, don't volunteer unless you really have the time to do it, and also volunteer for things that you really like to do. Okay. And leading volunteers is a little bit different than working and leading employees. So there's a lot of different dynamics there. But what I've learned from the volunteer side is that you absolutely positively have to be connected to those leaders, to those volunteers. You have to connect with them via phone call or email and meetings and things like that. You need to show that you are supporting them, that you happen to be a really good listener, and just kind of, you're sort of like coaching and mentoring at the same time here. You don't want people to over allocate themselves, step on into too much work, because that actually creates a problem where you can't volunteer anymore. You got too much work to do. So a lot of it is balance. Pick the things that you like to do, that you have the time to do. Make a commitment to actually do that. Once you volunteer, you are making a commitment. So I will tell people right up front, okay, before you sign off on this and you're going to become a volunteer, I need to know that you're actually going to follow through on this. Okay, that I don't want you to come to me in 2 months from now and say, well, I got a family this, I got a new job, I got all this. If you think that's going to happen, then don't volunteer, because it actually causes damage to the organization. So I would say that the biggest lesson learned is that relationship building. Whether you're in a volunteer organization or in the corporate structure, you need to establish good, solid working relations with people. You need to show respect. In the corporate world, especially if you're in disagreement, you have to find a way to get through that. You have to be pretty good at, we'll say, conflict resolution, where it's you and I against the problem, not you against me, kind of a thing. So It really all boils down to relationship building, sustaining the relationship, maintaining a connection with people, and showing, and this is probably the most important part, showing some empathy that you actually care, that you're motivated by this also. You see, if you're not motivated, people are going to pick up on that right away, and they are certainly not going to be motivated. So it starts with you. You have to have a tremendous amount of energy each day. And I tell people, at the end of the day, you're going to be tired, but you have to be ready to do that the next day. You have to have this energy all the time to motivate people and keep them going, because they're going to say, look at all the things that he's doing or she's doing. They really mean this. They're into this. They have passion for it, and you want them to have that passion too. So that's kind of what I learned from it.
That's great. When you look at the evolution of the profession, you talked about joining PMI in 1990, and you've kept very active. Think about what the profession was and how it's evolved. And with you now being a fellow, having originally aspired to become a fellow, and you've achieved it, and it's been a few years, I believe, since you've been awarded the fellow. But what do you think has happened to the profession over the years in terms of how it evolved, how far it's come, and then where do we still need to grow, and how do we still need to grow?
Well, a lot has changed, since I started with officially as a project management professional. We had agile come in, we had critical chain. We have, I guess, a multiple different types of agile, programs out there now. I think the last time I checked, there were like 50 different versions of agile. That PMI kind of changed the name of project manager to change maker. There were emphasis on what I think was called citizen developers. Lots and lots of different things have really kind of shaped project management going forward. The talent triangle at PMI is now power skills instead of soft skills, and it's ways of working instead of methods, and it's business acumen instead of strategic planning. I mean, things have changed quite a bit. So I would say that, especially for the aspiring project manager, that you have to be in a continuous professional development mode. You have to keep learning, and things are changing rapidly, especially with AI, so we have to kind of keep an eye on that. But I think that the most important thing for project managers today, understanding that you need to have tools and techniques, methods and so on, the planning processes, work breakdown structures, those kinds of things. If you're in the agile, understanding the iteration and incremental build process. But if you don't have very strong power skills, these are the soft skills of communication, relationship building, conflict management, giving presentations, just listening, communication. It's going to be a tough road. And the other thing I think is that if you plan on moving forward in your career, you absolutely have to focus more on some of the business aspects of project management. How does the project connect to the strategic plan? What is strategic planning? How does it affect the organization? Portfolio management, working on the right projects. I mean, I think these are the kinds of things that today's project managers really have to focus on. So I think soft skills today are probably incredibly important, with a little bit of the fact that since we're moving into a high rate of technology change, you still have to stay up to date on all of that, especially with all the evolving things that are going on with AI. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was thinking about is I had Lee Lambert on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the fact that he may have been a little bit shy and introverted, and then those skills developed over time. Now, you've always kind of struck me in our interactions as someone who's a bit of an extrovert. I don't know if you would be characterized as that, but that's how I kind of got to know you, because you're always in that leadership position with your guitar sometimes, singing, rallying the troops. So when you're talking about kind of keeping that energy, that's what comes to mind is with you getting everybody's energy up so that they can actually start thinking creatively. So maybe you can reflect a little bit on that.
Well, I'm not a shy guy, that's for sure. I kind of attribute that to the fact that I started to learn how to play the guitar when I was 13. I was inspired by my dad, who played the guitar, and shortly after that, got into bands, and started to play in front of people, and kind of enjoyed that, and I felt pretty comfortable on the stage, and I got my first taste of doing presentations when I was a supervisor at AT&T, and I was pretty nervous. But I had a certain particular job that I was talking about. And back then, we were using flip charts and overhead projectors. The technology is not. So I did my entire presentation on flip charts that I had written out. And at the end of my session, I got this really big round of applause. And I was really nervous at the beginning, but I settled in because I remember the one thing that I tell people is know your stuff. If you know your stuff, the first couple of minutes there might be what we call those butterflies, and you're feeling a little bit. But once you get into the groove and you know what you're talking about, it's going to be fine. And that's what happened to me. It turned out really well, and I got a big round of applause from my peers, and that was like, wow, I really like this. I'm going to have to do more of that. And so I started to do more presentations. I got involved with something called the quality of work life at AT&T, which was finding ways to have people collaborate best, even if you're management or the workforce. And I developed a lot of different new perspectives and better skills on listening and presentations and teamwork and leadership, and just kept on building on that. And so I really suggest to leaders, like I said before, get to know your people, may stay connected to them, listen to what they are saying, okay, act on their suggestions, and show appreciation. And one of the things that I profess that's really important, and this comes from a book called The Power of Acknowledgement that was written by a co-worker of mine, Judy Umlis. And she, in that book, talked about giving sincere acknowledgement. So I think that the key to establishing relationships and finding yourself in a good leadership position is to sincerely thank people for the work that they do. Don't just simply say good job, but take 30 seconds and explain why you thought it was a good job and that you really appreciated their work. That 20, 30-second investment of a sincere acknowledgement will get you, first of all, you're going to feel good that you gave it. They're going to feel good that they received it, and both of you are going to want to do that more. And I think that that's an inspiration and also a motivation to keep going, like thanking people and appreciating the work that they do.
That resonates quite a bit. When you're talking about basically acknowledging people, one of the things that sometimes we get into the habit of subconsciously is the yes, but mentality, where you're thinking about, you want to give somebody feedback, so you give them a very meaningless generic platitude, and then you jump into criticism. But when you flip that and you think about genuine gratitude, that really totally changes the dynamic altogether.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The yes, but you say, hey, you did a really good job on that, but then all of that you just said just kind of evaporates. It's no longer valid. So I try to stay away from the yes but kind of thing and say, okay, help me understand that, or that sounds like a pretty good perspective. Tell me more. I really need to understand it, instead of this yes but, because as soon as you do that, you're actually kind of putting that person on the defensive, because they know that you're telling them by that statement that you're not really in agreement with them at all. So I think phrasing and how you respond to ideas is another critical part of being a good leader. That the yes but is just simply shutting them down. But if you don't agree with it, or if you don't understand it, well, then say, okay, tell me more. I don't understand. How will that help us? As opposed to, but, because that's just erases everything. So that's a key thing for leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that really resonated is what you said earlier, about preparation. I'm unlike you. You're an extrovert. You're not shy. I'm an introvert, and while I was able to work through any particular shyness in my personality, introvert always. What I learned out of that is preparation is key, and it sounds like even for extroverts, preparation is key. So when you're thinking, oh, I'll just wing it, and then you fall flat because you weren't prepared. It's not about whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. It's about whether you're being prepared or not. And so it's good to kind of have that context from both sides, as it were, from the introvert and the extrovert. And kind of when you think about kind of falling flat, and you think about challenges and failures, if you were to reflect a little bit about your career and your long-term volunteer and leadership activities, what is one lesson about leadership or project management that you learned perhaps the hard way, and something you'd wished you knew a lot earlier in your career?
Well, I can look back. There were a couple of incidents where it was pretty uncomfortable, and it was kind of a tough time, and didn't really know what I was going to do. But I kind of looked back at that particular experience, and I said, I'm not going to ever let that happen again. You let your guard down, and then unfortunate things happen, and you start to kind of lose control. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling, okay? And your first reaction is, I quit. I'm going to give up. And then you have to say to yourself, well, that's running away is certainly not the answer. But what are you going to do to not let that happen again? And then you start to find ways. You go through, maybe find a coach, find a mentor that you can bounce things off of and confide in and say, I really messed up on this. I need to find a way out of it. But I think that the key word is resiliency. You have to have that ability to bounce back. And that one particular incident that I remember back in 1988, I think it was a tough time, very tough time. And, I got through it. But just based on the fact that, I wasn't in such terrible trouble that I was going to get fired. But at the same time, I said I could really do a lot better than this. And I wasn't prepared. And I said, I'm not ever going to let that happen again. So I prepared myself to the nth degree, constantly reading, constantly learning, taking training, reading books, talking to people, establishing relationships with people that I could rely on. And I said to myself, I'm not going to let that happen again. And that led me to a completely new situation. And it worked out really well. So that's kind of where I'm at today.
Great. As we look towards the future and look at project management, what is your hope for project managers in terms of what we will be known for beyond just simply delivery and control?
Well, I think project managers have to keep in mind that you are leading a team. So your primary function is lead the team, and it's the team that is going to produce the deliverable. But on top of all of that, and PMI has professed this for years, that the deliverable is important, but it's what will happen after the deliverable in terms of what we call impact and outcome and value creation. What has happened that has created value for yourself, for the organization, for the customer, for your people. And I have a value equation that I like to use here, and that is that if you come into work every day and you produce something, even the tiniest bit of value, people are going to take notice of that, okay? And then that value that you are producing is noticed by more and more people. Value creation develops brand. I'm going to call this personal brand, okay? Because people say, wow, you're producing some really useful things. Or, we're going to go to Philip. It's the Philip brand because you do such great things, right? Now, if you attain brand recognition, you have now achieved success. So value gets us brand recognition. Brand recognition is an indication of success. So how do you keep that going? And the answer is produce more value. So it's a cycle. Okay, so You have to stay in the mode of, I'm going to do something that's valuable, that's useful, that people are going to take notice. And if I can keep doing that, I will always be successful. So it's a cycle, and but we need to get people to keep at it, even when you have something that causes a little bit of a down spiral or something like. You need to get back up. You got to be resilient. A student in one of my classes shared something I thought was really important. We were talking about risk and failure, and she said, "Well, I learned from my professor that the word fail," and she went to the flip chart and wrote fail vertically, and she said FAIL means first attempt in learning. So I profess that forever and ever, that don't be afraid to fail. Fail, you're going to learn some new things, and then you're going to try again, and you got to keep that resiliency going. So I just like that lesson, first attempt in learning. So I learned a lot of stuff. How do I apply it so I can get to that next level, and so on and so on. So I think that was,
A lot of great nuggets of wisdom, and in particular, what I like about the value equation that you talked about is that it's future oriented. Because let's face it, what you did yesterday or the day before or the year before is irrelevant. Even if it's the best, project success or delivery success, it's old news. It's all about what you're going to do today and what you're going to do tomorrow. And I like that value equation from that perspective. As we come to a close with the podcast, I want you to share with us, if you were to talk to the future generation of project management practitioners and professionals, or individuals who are, starting new today, either as young professionals or individuals who are making a transition into a career in project management, what advice would you have for them as they are entering the profession?
well, an advice that I've given to a lot of people is, when you first get in there, you should have some sort of goal in mind. Where do you want to be, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, and to kind of set your sights on that. But in order to get there, don't over commit yourself. Okay, you have to understand your limitations. And I just had this conversation just like 2 days ago. When you get a job assignment, what you want to do is you want to get that job assignment under control. And then once you find that that is under control, you're going to find that you have extra time. You have some disposable time in there. Expand out, learn something new. And then as you expand out and you learn something new, you're going to find that I have some disposable time. Let me learn something else. So don't overcommit. Don't do things that you can't do. Don't commit to do things that you really shouldn't be doing. Don't overcommit, and don't say yes to everything. Understand your limitations, and I would say get a mentor to help you to kind of reason through things and to prepare yourself for the challenges that are going to be out there. I think that those would be the things that I would say.
Great advice. Frank, thank you so much for a great episode of Project Management Matters. I really enjoyed talking with you. And again, for those of you who are with us, thanks and have a great day. Looking forward to our next episode. Bye-bye.